A man stands on stage, guitar in hand, thousands of fans screaming his name. But when someone shouts Nicole from the crowd, his face changes. The smile falters. The energy shifts. And for just a moment, you can see something break inside Keith Urban. This isn't just another concert moment. This is a story of love that the world thought would last forever, a marriage that seemed unbreakable, and a heartbreak that nobody saw coming. After weeks of silence, after the headlines and the speculation, Keith Urban is finally ready to talk. And what he has to say will change everything you thought you knew about one of Hollywood's most beloved couples. This is the truth about Keith and Nicole. This is what really happened behind closed doors. And trust me, you're not ready for what comes next. When the news broke on September 30th, 2025, the world collectively gasped. Nicole Kidman had filed for divorce from Keith Urban after 19 years of marriage. 19 years. Nearly 2 decades of what seemed like picture-perfect love, gone in the stroke of a pen signing divorce papers. Social media erupted. Fans couldn't believe it. The couple who had given us countless red carpet moments, sweet social media posts, and genuine displays of affection was calling it quits. But here's what nobody was talking about in those first chaotic hours after the announcement. This wasn't a sudden decision. This wasn't a spontaneous split. According to multiple sources close to the couple, Keith and Nicole had been living apart since the beginning of summer 2025. That means for months, while we were watching their social media, analyzing their public appearances, and believing in their fairy tale, the reality behind closed doors was something entirely different. Let's rewind for a moment. Let's go back to where it all began, because you can't understand the ending without knowing the beginning. January 2005, the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles. It was an event celebrating Australians in entertainment, and both Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman were in attendance. She was already an Oscar-winning actress, a global superstar who had been married to Tom Cruise and had experienced the highest highs and lowest lows of Hollywood relationships. He was a rising country music star, talented and charismatic, but nowhere near the household name he would become. They were introduced by actor Jeffrey Rush, and by all accounts, there was an instant connection. Nicole would later describe it as being immediately attracted to him. She noticed his eyes first. She said in interviews, the way they sparkle with genuine warmth and kindness. But here's where the story gets interesting. Despite that instant chemistry, despite exchanging phone numbers that very night, Keith didn't call Nicole for 4 months. 4 entire months. Can you imagine being Nicole Kidman, one of the most beautiful and accomplished women in the world, giving your number to someone you're interested in, and then hearing nothing for a third of a year? She later admitted that she thought he simply wasn't interested. She assumed he looked at her life, the spotlight, the baggage from her previous marriage, the children, the constant media attention, and decided it was too much. But that wasn't it all. Keith has since explained that he was terrified. He was dealing with his own demons at the time, struggling with addiction issues that he hadn't fully confronted yet. He didn't feel worthy of someone like Nicole. He was intimidated not just by her fame, but by her substance, her intelligence, her depth. When he finally did work up the courage to call her, something magical happened. They talked for hours, and then they talked again the next day. And the day after that, within weeks, they were inseparable. Nicole has described one date in particular that made her fall completely in love with Keith. He picked her up on his Harley-Davidson motorcycle and took her for a ride through Woodstock, New York. Just the two of them, the open road, the wind in their hair, no cameras, no paparazzi, just two people getting to know each other. After the ride, they went to a little cafe and talked until closing time. Nicole said it was the first time in years she had felt like a normal person on a normal date. Keith made her feel safe. He made her feel seen not as Nicole Kidman, the movie star, but as Nicole, the woman. That night, she knew this was the man she was going to marry. And she was right. On June 25th, 2006, just a year and a half after that first meeting, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman were married in a Catholic ceremony in Sydney, Australia. It was intimate, romantic, and seemingly perfect. Nicole wore a white Balenciaga gown with delicate spaghetti straps. Keith wore a classic black tuxedo. The photos were stunning. Everyone who was there described the love between them as palpable, as undeniable. They looked at each other like they were the only two people in the world. But fairy tales don't exist in real life, and the cracks started showing almost immediately. Just 4 months after their wedding, Keith Urban checked himself into rehab. For months, they had barely settled into married life, barely unpacked the wedding gifts, and already they were facing their first major crisis. Keith had relapsed with alcohol, falling back into patterns of addiction that he had been battling for years. Nicole was devastated, but she didn't run. She didn't file for divorce or give up on him. Instead, she stood by his side. She visited him in rehab. She attended family therapy sessions. She made it clear that she was in this marriage for the long haul, through sickness and health, through the good times and the bad. Keith would later say in interviews that Nicole saved his life during that period. He said that her love, her unwavering support, her refusal to give up on him gave him the strength to finally face his demons and get truly sober. He completed his 90-day rehab program, and when he came out, he was a changed man. He threw himself into his recovery, into his 12-step program, into therapy. He also threw himself into his music and into his marriage. The years that followed saw Keith Urban become one of the biggest names in country music. He won Grammy Awards. He sold out arenas. He became a judge on American Idol. His career exploded. At the same time, Nicole continued to dominate Hollywood, taking on challenging roles, producing films, and cementing her legacy as one of the greatest actresses of her generation. And through it all, they seemed to support each other perfectly. He would show up at her movie premieres, sitting in the audience beaming with pride. She would fly across the country to surprise him at his concerts, sometimes even joining him on stage. They had 2 beautiful daughters together, Sunday Rose, born in 2008, and Faith Margaret, born in 2010 via surrogate. From the outside, it looked like they had figured out the impossible equation: how to balance 2 massive careers, raise a family, maintain a strong marriage, and stay grounded despite the insanity of fame. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Maybe it was gradual, so slow that even they didn't notice it at first. Or maybe there were specific moments, specific breaking points that they kept hidden from the world. According to sources close to the couple, the problem started becoming more serious around 2024. The issue was time, or rather the lack of it. Nicole was constantly traveling for film projects. Keith was on the road touring for months at a time. They would go weeks without seeing each other, communicating mainly through text messages and late-night phone calls across different time zones. Nicole has 4 children total, 2 adopted kids from her marriage to Tom Cruise, and the 2 daughters she shares with Keith. Balancing all of those relationships, those responsibilities, while maintaining her career was becoming increasingly difficult. And Keith, despite his sobriety and his success, was struggling with the loneliness of life on tour. In an interview that resurfaced after their split was announced, Keith opened up about how isolating touring can be. He described his life on the road as lonely and sometimes even miserable. He talked about the paradox of being surrounded by thousands of fans who love your music, but feeling completely alone the moment you step off stage and go back to your hotel room. He talked about missing home, missing his wife, missing his daughters. But he also acknowledged that music was his life, his passion, his purpose. He couldn't imagine giving up touring, but he also couldn't figure out how to balance it with his family life. Nicole, meanwhile, was dealing with her own set of challenges. In late 2024, she filmed a movie called Babygirl, playing a high-powered executive who has an affair with a younger intern. The role required her to do intimate scenes that were more explicit than anything she had done in her career. And according to insiders, Keith was not comfortable with it. There are reports that Keith and Nicole had arguments about the film, about the content, about the optics. Some sources say Keith felt disrespected by Nicole's choice to take on such a sexually charged role at this stage in her marriage and her career. Others say that's an oversimplification, that the real issue was deeper than just one movie. The real issue was that they had become 2 people living separate lives that occasionally intersected rather than 2 people building one life together. There were also rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, about infidelity. Some tabloids speculated about Keith and a young female musician named Maggie Ball, who was part of his tour. Others whispered about Nicole growing close to various co-stars over the years. But people close to both Keith and Nicole have adamantly denied any affairs. They insist that the split wasn't about infidelity. It was about two people who loved each other but couldn't figure out how to be together anymore. Then came the summer of 2025. Keith and Nicole made a decision to separate. Not publicly, not officially, just quietly. Keith moved out of their family home in Nashville. Nicole stayed with the girls. They told their daughters what was happening, and by all accounts, Sunday and Faith were devastated. 17-year-old Sunday Rose and 14-year-old Faith Margaret had grown up watching their parents' love story, believing it was unshakable. Now they were faced with the reality that even the strongest seeming marriages can fall apart. The separation was supposed to be a trial period, a chance for both Keith and Nicole to figure out what they really wanted. But as the weeks turned into months, it became clear that they were heading toward divorce rather than reconciliation. In September 2025, just weeks before the divorce was filed, Keith did an interview with Australian radio show Jonesy and Amanda. The hosts, not knowing about the private separation, asked Keith about Nicole. Specifically, they asked about her movie Babygirl and her on-screen chemistry with much younger actor Zac Efron. Keith's response was striking. He got visibly uncomfortable. His voice changed. He gave short, clipped answers and then abruptly ended that portion of the interview. At the time, listeners thought it was just Keith being private about his personal life, something he had always been. But in hindsight, knowing what we know now, it was clearly a man who was already separated from his wife being forced to talk about her in a way that was painful and awkward. That interview has now been watched millions of times, with people analyzing every facial expression, every word, looking for clues about the impending divorce. On September 30th, 2025, Nicole Kidman officially filed for divorce in Los Angeles County Superior Court. The filing listed the date of separation as the same day. Those sources say they had actually been separated since early summer. The reason cited was irreconcilable differences, which is standard language in California divorces, but doesn't tell us much about what actually went wrong. However, multiple sources spoke to various media outlets in the days following the announcement, and a clearer picture started to emerge. According to these sources, it was Keith who ultimately wanted out of the marriage. Nicole, they said, was blindsided. She had hoped that the separation would be temporary, that they would work through their issues and find their way back to each other. But Keith had apparently come to the conclusion that the marriage couldn't be saved. He had, according to one source, called Nicole out about his unhappiness. He told her that he felt like they were roommates who occasionally saw each other rather than husband and wife. He said he was tired of the distance, both physical and emotional. Nicole was reportedly hurt and felt betrayed. Here was a woman who had stood by Keith through addiction, through career struggles, through everything. And now, when she needed him to fight for their marriage, he was walking away. Sources close to Nicole said the split was turning dramatic. They describe her as holding the family together through this difficult time, focusing on her daughters, and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for them despite the chaos. She threw herself into work, attending the Venice Film Festival and other promotional events for her films, putting on a brave face to the cameras while privately dealing with heartbreak. Keith, meanwhile, continued touring. He had concerts scheduled, obligations to fulfill, but those who know him say he was struggling. One source described him as embarrassed and in hiding, not wanting to talk about the divorce publicly, not wanting to face the scrutiny and judgment that was inevitably coming his way. Then in October, something happened that gave the world a glimpse into Keith's emotional state. He was performing at a concert, doing what he does best, singing his heart out for his fans. At one point, a woman in the crowd shouted out that her name was Nicole. Keith's reaction was caught on video and immediately went viral. He paused, gave a slight grimace that he tried to turn into a smile, and made a joke about it. But you could see the pain flash across his face. You could see how much hearing that name hurt him. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion from a man who had been keeping his feelings tightly controlled in public. The video was watched millions of times, with comments ranging from sympathy for Keith to anger at the fan for being insensitive to speculation about what he must be feeling. A few days after that concert, Keith had to cancel another show due to a health issue. Representatives said he was dealing with an undisclosed medical problem and needed a rest, but many speculated that the stress of the divorce was taking a physical toll on him. It's worth noting that Keith has always been open about the connection between his mental health and his physical health, about how emotional stress can manifest in physical ways. So it's entirely possible that the heartbreak of his marriage ending was making him physically ill. As October rolled on, both Keith and Nicole tried to move forward with their lives. Nicole gave interviews where she talked about painful life changes without directly mentioning the divorce. She spoke about how everything happens for a reason, how she believes in fate and destiny, how she's not dwelling on regrets. Those close to her say she's focusing on the positive, on her children, on her career, on the next chapter of her life. Keith, on the other hand, has largely stayed silent. He hasn't given any major interviews specifically about the divorce. He hasn't posted anything about it on social media. He simply continued to show up, to perform, to do his job. But in his silence, there's a story being told. There's a grief that's palpable to anyone paying attention. At one recent concert, he performed a song called "The Fighter," which he wrote about Nicole years ago. It's a love song about overcoming obstacles together, about being each other's champion. Singing that song now, knowing they're getting divorced, was reportedly incredibly emotional for him. Some fans who were there said they could hear his voice crack, see tears in his eyes. It was a moment of brutal honesty, of a man confronting the loss of the great love of his life in real time. So what really happened? What broke Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman? The truth is probably a combination of many factors. There's the obvious issue of time and distance. When two people are rarely in the same place at the same time, when they're both pursuing demanding careers that take them in different directions, it's incredibly difficult to maintain intimacy and connection. There's the issue of different priorities. Keith is at a point in his career where touring is essential. He's a live performer. That's where he connects with his fans and his art. Nicole is at a point in her career where she's being offered the most interesting, challenging roles she's ever had. Neither one wanted to give up what they loved professionally, but their professional loves were pulling them apart personally. There's the issue of communication, or the lack thereof. Multiple sources have said that Keith and Nicole stopped really talking to each other about the hard stuff. They discussed logistics, schedules, the kids, but they stopped having deep, vulnerable conversations about their feelings, their fears, their needs. There's also, perhaps, the issue of growth and change. People change over 19 years. The person you marry at 38 or 39 years old isn't necessarily the same person you're still compatible with at 57 or 58. Keith and Nicole both grew and evolved during their marriage, and it's possible they simply grew in different directions. Keith, through a sobriety journey, became more introspective, more focused on emotional authenticity and living in the moment. Nicole, through her work and her life experiences, became more ambitious, more driven, more focused on legacy and achievement. Those aren't incompatible qualities, but they require effort to balance, and somewhere along the way, they stopped putting in that effort. And then there's a simple, sad truth that sometimes love isn't enough. Keith and Nicole clearly loved each other. By all accounts, there's still love there now even as they're getting divorced. But love without time, without presence, without shared experiences and intimacy can only sustain a relationship for so long. Let's talk about the beginning again, but this time with the wisdom of hindsight. When Keith finally called Nicole after those 4 months of silence, when they started dating and falling in love, there were already warning signs of what would eventually tear them apart. Keith was deep in his addiction at that time, using substances to cope with loneliness and insecurity. When he got sober 4 months into their marriage, he swapped one coping mechanism for another. He threw himself into work, into touring, into being constantly busy. That's a common pattern for people in recovery. They learn to stay active, to stay focused on something other than their addiction. But the downside is that it can become its own kind of addiction, an addiction to busyness, to distraction, to anything that keeps you from sitting still with your thoughts and feelings. Nicole, meanwhile, had her own patterns. Coming out of her marriage to Tom Cruise, a relationship that had been intense and all-consuming and ultimately painful, she had vowed to maintain her independence, her own identity, her own career. She never wanted to be seen as just someone's wife again. So she said yes to projects that took her away from home. She said yes to opportunities that conflicted with Keith's schedule. She prioritized her career in a way that was healthy and necessary for her sense of self. But that also meant she wasn't always available for her marriage. Neither of those things is wrong individually. A person in recovery staying busy and focused on their work is good. A woman maintaining her career and identity separate from her husband is good. But together, in a marriage, without intentional effort to also prioritize a relationship, those things became a slow-motion disaster. There's a speech Keith gave in June of 2024 at an event honoring Nicole. It was beautiful and heartfelt and full of love. He talked about how Nicole had saved him, how she had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself, how her love had transformed his life. He also talked about how he almost blew it, how his addiction almost destroyed them before they really had a chance to begin. At the time, everyone saw that speech as a celebration of their enduring love, a testament to how they had overcome obstacles and come out stronger. But now, looking back, you can see something else in Keith's words. You can see a man who was aware how fragile their marriage was, how easily it could have ended before, how much work it took to maintain it. That speech was in June 2024. By July or August of 2025, just a little over a year later, they had separated. What happened in that year? According to various reports, it was a perfect storm of bad timing and mounting tensions. Keith's tour schedule in late 2024 and early 2025 was brutal. He was on the road more than he was home. When he did have breaks, Nicole was often away filming. They would sometimes go 3 or 4 weeks without seeing each other in person. Their daughters were getting older, becoming teenagers with their own lives and schedules and needs. Sunday Rose was preparing for college applications, thinking about her future. Faith Margaret was navigating the challenges of being a young teenager. Both girls needed their parents, but their parents were never both there at the same time. It created stress in the family dynamic, resentment that built up gradually over months. Then there was the Babygirl situation. This deserves a deeper look because multiple sources have mentioned it as a turning point. Nicole filmed Babygirl in early 2025. The movie, directed by Helena Rain, is about a powerful female CEO who begins an affair with a much younger intern. The film is explicitly sexual in ways that Nicole's previous work had not been. She did nudity. She did graphic intimate scenes. She played a character who was morally complex and difficult to sympathize with. When the first trailers and promotional materials came out, there was a lot of public discussion about Nicole's choices. Some praised her for being fearless and taking artistic risks at 58 years old. Others criticized her, questioned why she would do such explicit content, wondered what her husband and children thought about it. According to insiders, Keith had mixed feelings about the film from the beginning. He supported Nicole's career and her right to choose whatever role she wanted. But privately, he was uncomfortable with how sexual the content was, especially given that her co-star Zac Efron was significantly younger. There are reports that they had heated discussions about it, that Keith felt Nicole should have consulted him more before accepting the role, that Nicole felt Keith was being controlling and trying to limit her artistic freedom. Neither of them has confirmed these reports, so we don't know exactly what was said behind closed doors. But what we do know is that by the time Babygirl premiered at the Venice Film Festival in September 2025, Keith and Nicole were days away from Nicole filing for divorce. And Keith did not attend the premiere with her, which was notable and noticed by everyone. Nicole walked the red carpet alone. She gave interviews alone. She accepted praise for her performance alone. And when reporters asked where Keith was, her answers were vague and uncomfortable. That Venice Film Festival appearance was September 28, 2025. 2 days later, Nicole filed for divorce. The timing cannot be coincidental. Something happened in Venice, or right before Venice, or right after Venice, that pushed Nicole to finally make the divorce official. Some speculate that Keith gave her an ultimatum, told her he wanted out and she needed to file. Others speculate that Nicole was tired of pretending everything was fine and decided it was time to make their separation public and legal. We may never know the exact sequence of events, but the result was the same. On September 30th, the world learned that one of Hollywood's most beloved marriages was over. In the weeks since the announcement, both Keith and Nicole have been navigating this new reality. Nicole has been focused on promoting her various projects, including Babygirl and the Netflix series Lioness. She's given several interviews where she's talked vaguely about life changes and new chapters without going into detail about the divorce. In one particularly revealing interview with Vogue that was conducted just weeks before the divorce was filed, Nicole spoke about mortality and meaning. She talked about losing her mother earlier in the year and how that loss had made her reevaluate everything in her life. She talked about wanting to be braver, wanting to take more risks, wanting to live more fully in whatever time she has left. Reading that interview now, with the knowledge of the impending divorce, it feels like a woman who was preparing for a major life change, who was psyching herself up to do something difficult but necessary. Keith, as mentioned, has said very little publicly. He's continued to tour, to perform, to meet with fans. But those who know him say he's struggling. One source close to Keith described him as heartbroken, but also resigned. The source said Keith knows the divorce is the right decision for both of them, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. He apparently feels like he failed at the most important relationship of his life, and that failure is weighing heavily on him. There's also the practical side of divorce to consider. Keith and Nicole have significant shared assets. They own multiple properties together, including homes in Nashville, New York, Los Angeles, and Australia. They have shared custody of their 2 minor daughters to figure out. There are questions about spousal support, division of assets, all the ugly financial and legal realities that come with ending a long marriage. One interesting detail that has emerged is about their prenuptial agreement. Apparently, Keith and Nicole had a prenup that included what's being called a cocaine clause. This was apparently insisted upon by Nicole, given Keith's history with addiction. The clause basically stated that if Keith relapsed and used drugs or alcohol, he would forfeit certain financial benefits in the divorce. It's unclear if that clause is being invoked now or if it's even relevant given that Keith has maintained his sobriety throughout their marriage. But the existence of such a clause tells you something about the foundation of their relationship, about the fears and protections that were baked in from the very beginning. It also raises questions about what it's like to be in a marriage where your spouse has that kind of legal protection against your potential relapse. How does that affect trust? How does that affect vulnerability? How does that affect your ability to be fully yourself in the relationship? These are complicated questions without easy answers, but they're part of the story of Keith and Nicole. As for their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, this has to be incredibly difficult for them. 17 and 14 are already challenging ages, full of change and uncertainty and identity formation. To have your parents divorce on top of all that, to have it play out in the public eye with millions of people watching and commenting, must be overwhelming. Sources say Nicole is doing everything she can to protect the girls from the worst of the media circus. She's limiting their access to social media and tabloid coverage. She's gotten them into therapy. She's trying to maintain as much normalcy as possible in their daily lives. Keith is apparently doing the same, staying in close contact with his daughters even while he's on tour, making sure they know he loves them and that the divorce is not their fault in any way. There are reports that Sunday and Faith are angry at their dad, that they blame Keith for the split more than they blame Nicole. This makes sense given that multiple sources have said Keith was the one who wanted out. Teenagers tend to see things in black and white, and if they believe their dad gave up on the marriage, they might have a hard time forgiving him for that. But time and therapy and maturity will hopefully help them see the situation with more nuance, understand that relationships are complex, and that sometimes people can love each other but still not be able to make a marriage work. Looking at the bigger picture, the Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman divorce is a reminder that fame and success and wealth don't protect you from heartbreak. It's a reminder that relationships require constant effort, constant prioritization, constant choice. You don't get to coast on the love you felt at the beginning. You have to keep choosing each other, keep showing up for each other, keep doing the work even when it's hard and you're tired and you have a million other demands on your time and attention. Keith and Nicole, for all their talent and accomplishment and resources, couldn't make that work. Or maybe more accurately, they chose not to make it work, whether consciously or unconsciously. They chose their careers over their marriage. They chose distance over intimacy. They chose busy over present. And now they're dealing with the consequences of those choices. There's no villain in this story. Keith isn't a bad guy for wanting out a marriage that was making him unhappy. Nicole isn't a bad woman for prioritizing her career and her artistic freedom. They're just two people who wanted different things, needed different things, and couldn't find a way to reconcile those differences. It's sad. It's painful. But it's also deeply human. As we move forward and watch this divorce play out over the coming months, there will be more revelations, more details, more he said, she said from various sources. There will probably be some ugliness as lawyers negotiate and finances get divided and custody gets determined. There might even be some public mudslinging, though hopefully Keith and Nicole will stay classy and keep things private for the sake of their daughters. But the essential story is already clear. Two people fell in love 20 years ago. They had some beautiful years together. They had some hard years together. They created a family together. They supported each other's dreams and careers. They survived addiction and public scrutiny and the pressures of fame. But ultimately, they couldn't survive the distance between them, both literal and figurative. And now they're going their separate ways, trying to figure out who they are as individuals rather than as a couple. Keith Urban is finally breaking his silence, not with words necessarily, but with actions, with the pain visible on his face, with the grief in his voice when he sings songs he wrote about Nicole, with his continued determination to show up and do his job even when his personal life is falling apart. And maybe that's the most honest form of communication there is. Not a carefully crafted statement, not a sit-down interview with carefully rehearsed talking points, but just a raw, unfiltered reality of a man going through one of the hardest periods of his life in front of millions of people. Nicole, in her own way, is doing the same thing. She's showing up to film festivals and interviews and red carpets, looking stunning and composed, talking about her work with passion and intelligence. But if you look closely, you can see the sadness in her eyes. You can hear the weariness in her voice. You can sense that behind the polished exterior is a woman who is heartbroken and scared and trying to figure out what the next chapter of her life looks like. Both of them are being brave in their own ways. Both of them are surviving something that would break a lot of people. And both of them will emerge from this eventually, scarred but standing, ready to move forward with their lives. The love story of Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman didn't have the fairy tale ending we all wanted, but it had a real ending, a human ending. And there's something valuable in that, something we can all learn from. Love is not always enough. Good intentions are not always enough. History and commitment and shared children are not always enough. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, despite years of trying, a relationship runs its course and ends. And that's okay. It's painful, but it's okay. So where does this leave us? With Keith Urban on stage, singing his heart out, trying to heal through music the way he always has. With Nicole Kidman on set, pouring her emotions into her performances, trying to make sense of loss through art the way she always has. With two daughters watching their parents navigate this impossible situation with as much grace as they can muster. And with millions of fans around the world learning once again that even the most beautiful love stories can end, that even the strongest seeming marriages can break, that life is messy and complicated and doesn't always work out the way we hope. Keith Urban has broken his silence about Nicole Kidman's love, not with words, but with the truth written all over his face. The truth is that he loved her, that he still loves her, but that love, in the end, wasn't enough to overcome everything else. And maybe that's the saddest truth of all.